Why hello there, how are you today? Awesome Soul here, and we are back, talking about D.R.O.N.E. So, as I'm sure some of you are aware, there was the trailer number 4 for the Arena Editor series that was put out 2 days ago, and this one focuses on vegetation as well as rocks that you can place into the game. So we've covered a lot of things, and this one specifically covers placeable objects, or at least some placeable objects, because they're going to be covering more placeable objects in the next video, but that's not out yet. Won't be out for a little while. So for now, we will talk about trees and rocks. And oh my god, just watching the trailer, these things add so much life to the map. Before, it looked cool, but just seeing the before and after of the map with and without these trees and rocks everywhere, it's just day and night, basically. It looks absolutely amazing, and later on in the footage you're watching, it'll go into the drone vision. And this is after they have rendered out the shading, because if you don't know, I think it was in the first or second Arena Editor video, they talked about where, you can edit your map normally, but then if you want to go for a higher level of detail, you have to let your map sort of render out, and that will give the more highly detailed shadows, etc, etc. Just to improve the quality, basically. I should also point out that the footage you're watching is sped up. Not by me, but by the developers. Obviously, it would have taken them probably 3 times longer if they wanted to place all these trees down. Interestingly enough, though, they will be adding brushes for trees. My hope here, though, is highly customizable brushes. And for those who don't exactly know what a brush is, at least when talking about map design, I have actually worked with sort of terrain painting brushes in the past, but from what I've gathered from my limited time using them, basically all you need to know is they can come in different textures, and you've got sort of like a grayscale map, but where everything, I believe it is darker, or it might be different depending on which program you're using. But it's been like good 5 years since I've had to use anything like that, so forgive me if I have that mixed up. So yeah, for, I guess this example, let's say black, we'll actually paint it really thickly, and if you got like a gray color, that'll paint it sort of less potently, so in those sort of gray areas of the brush texture. In this case, obviously they're talking about trees, so you'll end up with a lighter spattering of trees, and if you got really light stuff, like almost white, you maybe will end up with like 1 or 2 random trees. Now, some programs actually allow you to import those sort of brush grayscale images. Hopefully you will be able to do something like that with D.R.O.N.E, because I know they have talked about that in the past, where basically you can implement your own custom brushes. Actually, no, they've only said custom brushes might be a possibility. So, fingers crossed it will, but no confirmation there just yet. Presumably you will be able to do the same with rocks, that's my hope anyway. And something cool that I do need to point out about rocks, actually, is that they are basically able to overlap. So if you wanted to, you could take one rock and stick a whole bunch of smaller rocks jutting out from the side, and there you have a even bigger rock that looks even fancier, I guess you could say, because the rocks they have are all sort of presets. They're objects built into the game. Now, there are quite a lot of them, and even the ones you see in the trailer are just a small limited batch, and they will be planning on adding more trees and more rocks in the future. But for now, or at least whenever the alpha version of the game releases, I guess, this is most likely the set that we are going to be able to play around with, and it's already a pretty big set of objects. But, like I said, this is cool because it allows the players to make their own rocks, and what I can gather from the trailer, at least by the wording they used, it was kind of weird. I'm not 100% sure by the wording. You'd have to go and check out the trailer for yourself, which, of course, I recommend you always do. But it seems like we will be able to save these clusters as like a preset. So you can make your own rocks that way, save the cluster, and then use that for other maps, or you can use it elsewhere in your current map. If they do add something like that, that will be incredibly handy for builders of maps. Instead of having to set down one rock and another rock and another rock to build the perfect rock that you want, you can just save it and plop it down. That'll save a good, 5 minutes, which doesn't seem like too much, but it certainly adds up. Maybe not 5 minutes, maybe more like 2 or 3, but of course, it adds up. Now, I didn't exactly cover this when I was talking about the trees, but I did sort of allude to it in the whole rock discussion when I went off on a bit of a tangent. There are a lot of different rock types, and there are a lot of different tree types. So if you want a needle tree, for example, they do have different kinds of trees. Hopefully they add a few more different species in the future. But if you want a needle tree, you can select one, plop it down, and then plop down another one beside it. It will then not look like the other tree, because by default it will then select random trees of that type from a pre-built pool that they have. Not entirely sure how many different variants they have, but they will be adding more in the future. What you see in the trailer is obviously somewhat limited. So that too is also very nice, because if you've got a really dense forest, you're not really gonna notice too much if one tree is looking like another tree, because there's just so much going on. There's leaves everywhere, there's bark everywhere, and you're flying through trees, dodging trees. You're not really gonna notice. But if you've got one tree out in the open, and then another tree sort of farther off, you've got a few trees placed here and there, basically. You're gonna be able to notice if one tree looks exactly like another tree. You're like, oh, wait a second, I saw that tree over there. So it's really awesome that they're putting this much detail and effort just into different trees and different rocks. The amount of stuff you can put into these maps is just, beautiful. But speaking of maps, what exactly am I thinking up when it comes to map designs? Well, something that I have an idea of is basically a cave/industrial factory hybrid. Not entirely sure how this is going to play out, but ideally, what I have an idea for, of course, once I actually get my hands on the editor, this idea might completely change because I might find better ways of doing this. But what I have in my mind from seeing these trailers is, like I said, an industrial factory on the top of a mountain kind of area, and then underneath is hollowed out using the rocks as sort of ground, because at least what we've seen here, you need to use rocks in order to make caves. But I'm perfectly fine with that, because the amount of detail we have in these rocks is pretty immense. And most rocks even have a sort of grassy covering as well, so it looks like the ground, almost. It's close enough. It's kind of like a really rocky mountain, which makes sense because my idea for this map is supposed to be sort of a mountain. So yeah, my idea for the map. Basically, there is this massive cave system underneath the map, but over top of it is a huge structure, possibly like a factory floor, depending on what kind of items we can get. I might do sort of a wide open factory or a smaller factory. But what I think would be really awesome is to have the floor of this factory sort of blown wide open, and it's got cracks everywhere, and from there you can dive down into the depths of this underground cave. Possibly they were mining this cave out, and that's why the factory was there. Like a ore refinery, almost. But instead of getting the ore from somewhere else, they would just dig out the ground below them, which, in hindsight, probably wasn't the best idea, which, actually, come to think it, would make perfect sense lore-wise, for the reason that this factory is now crumbling and abandoned. As far as the reasons players will need to go down and up from the bottom of the cave to the factory floor, not entirely sure. Perhaps I will make this an objective-only map, like a King of the Hill type area. So one time you will need to dive down into the cave to capture one point, whereas once that point is captured, then maybe a new point would appear up in the factory somewhere, and you have to fly up and quickly make it all the way there. Ideally, I would like to make this somewhat maze-like, but I know that can be kind of, well, off-putting to newer players who have just spawned into the map, and that's another interesting point. The creator of the map is going to have quite an advantage over people who are just randomly spawning onto their maps. Of course, though, the system they have in place, you probably won't be running into the creator of the map necessarily. You'll probably get put into this map just randomly with a bunch of other random people, because once it's uploaded, then it's on their server, and if it's popular enough, it will become a common sight to see on this sort of server browser thing that they're kind of setting up. But in the end, it's not really that big of a deal, I guess. Mainly because it's not going to take too long to understand the gist of the map, and from what I've seen of the gameplay, the way the game is structured, everyone is always going to be wanting to seek out kills. So if you can't find someone, chances are somebody who knows the map will come to you, and then from there, you can proceed to blast their face off, or they can blast your face off. Either way, there's always going to be some action going on somewhere. But before I wrap the video up, I do need to go back and talk about my map idea. So when it comes to the cave system, something like that is going to be super amazing, just because, you know, the light system. But when you render out your map, all of these rocks on top of it are going to not let any light through. Of course, you can have little tiny openings, which could be kind of interesting. I think I'll probably do that, just to have sort of little beams of light. Or what you could do is have the area completely covered, so it is pitch black down there. And what that's going to do is require you to have your headlights on. So it's going to completely change up the gameplay from this sort of light but kind of shadowy factory floor to this completely pitch black, almost maze-like area down below. Maybe with a few lights here and there, but rarely will you get a few lights, maybe some busted up lights if that's a possibility, and maybe one sort of single beam of light coming down from the actual area above, you know, like proper sunlight. Although that might be enough to light the whole cave, so I'll see how this goes. This is kind of a work in progress idea I have in my head. If only I had the map creator in front of me. Maybe one day, but not right now. Anyways, as always, I would like to hear from you guys, especially on what kind of maps you would like to make. Maybe type them out down below, give me a general gist of some of the things you want to add to your map. Now that we know quite a lot about how the map editor works, minus the sort of physics-based objects that's coming out in about a week from now, or at least the time I post this video. So yeah, we know quite a bit. And knowing all this information, how are you, the viewer, going to use this? You're gonna make a dense forest, you're gonna make half of a forest on one side, half of a factory on another side. The possibilities are endless. Or, well, nearly endless. But man, this kind of game is something I've wanted for a while. The ability to have this level of detail in a map editor which you can share with the world, and then not only that, but play on in what seems like an incredibly fun gameplay experience as well, is going to be amazing. Hopefully it can live up to the hype. But yes, I will go ahead and end the video right about here. I have been the Awesome Soul. I thank you so very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Take care.